So learning target C says you need to be able to use trig functions to solve real life problems. So all of these will be right triangle problems. So when you draw the picture, you should somewhere see a right angle. So one like this one where it says brothers Bob and Tom buy a tent that has a center pole of 6.25 feet high. If the sides of the tent are supposed to make a 50-degree angle with the ground, how wide is the tent? So when you draw that picture, I drew the tent, I put the pole in the center to be 6.25 feet. It says the angle with the ground, so here's the ground, is 50. How wide is the tent? So I had to find a right triangle. So I didn't want to use the big triangle of the tent. So I cut it in half, and I look at just this part. That is a right triangle. So I called this little piece X, because I want to know how wide it is. So I'm going to look at what is half of the width. So I looked at this and said 50 degrees. This side is opposite, and this is the adjacent. So I use tangent. The tangent of 50 degrees is equal to opposite 6.25 over X. So there's my equation. The tangent of my angle is the opposite leg over the adjacent leg. Now, when you have this divided by X, the X is in the bottom, and you aren't sure what to do with it, easiest thing to do is just think of that as I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by X to make that go away. So X times the tangent of 50 would equal 6.25. To solve for X, I'm going to divide by the tangent of 50. So just use your calculator, take 6.25, divide it by the tangent of 50. So when I did that, to solve for X, I get X to be 5.24. But remember, I want to know the whole width of the tent. So this also is X over here. They're the same length because that's in the center. So I just doubled that and said it was 10.48 feet. So that's the kinds of questions you'll be asked to do. It's going to give you some kind of an angle, so just be careful what it says. The angle with the ground the tent makes is 50 degrees. The center pole was 6.25, that was the height there, and I was looking for X. So then you have to decide what trig function, the SOHCAHTOA. Do I have opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? And whichever ones you have and what you're looking for, that's what you want to make sure you set up. Okay, so that's the word problems. All will deal with right triangles. All right, so in 9.2, D says you have to be able to draw angles in given in degrees in standard position. So standard position means you're always going to start with the positive x-axis. That's the initial side. If it's a positive angle, you're going to go around counterclockwise that many degrees. If it's a negative angle, you'll still start here, but you'll go clockwise around the circle. If you go all the way around, that's 360, or negative 360 this way. If I go positive, that would be positive 360. So if you have something that's more than 360 degrees, you have to keep going. All right, so the examples we gave you, 124. So if I start here, my initial side, and I go 124 degrees, it's going to put me in the second quadrant. Now, this doesn't really talk about reference angles, but realize when we talk about reference angles, we're really talking about what is that angle right there. So if I asked you what the reference angle of that would be, you would say 56 degrees. It's always a positive angle between 0 and 90 degrees. What is that acute angle? All right, so when you had to draw 280, so you start here at the initial side, you go, there's 180, down to here is 270, so I had to go 10 more than that. So I end up being in the fourth quadrant. Remember, that's 270 right there, so there's 280. If I ask you the reference angle, though, remember, it's the angle with the x-axis. So I would need to know what's that angle. So again, if I took 360 and subtracted that 280, I should get that there's 80 degrees here. So remember, reference angle, if they ask you, is that angle right there. Negative 55, so if it's negative, you start here, you go in this direction, it's only 55 degrees, so you still end up in the fourth quadrant, and again, there the reference angle would be 55 degrees. We gave you one over 360, so again, if you start here, you go around the circle here, that's 360, so I took 500 minus 360 and found out I have to go another 140, so that would put me to here. Second quadrant, again, if I asked you what is the reference angle, that's the angle with the x-axis, how much more would I have to go? If I went 140, I'd have to go 40 more to get to there, so that would be 40-degree reference angle. So you need to be able to basically draw the angles that are in degrees in standard position. Know about positive and negative angles. If it's over 360, that you keep going. And then also, even though this learning target didn't say that, it's going to come eventually, that we have to make sure you also know how to find that reference angle. All right, E says find coterminal. Coterminal means angles with the same terminal side. So to do that, you just have to look at the angle, and it says it's going to end up in the same place. Well, to end up in the same place, I can either add 360 degrees, or I can take that angle and subtract 360 degrees. So that's all you really need to have to know how to do. So if I give you 562 degrees, you could either subtract 360 degrees and tell me that's 202 degrees. You could add 360 and say that's 922 degrees. Now you could keep adding or subtracting and keep going around the circle for as many of them that you need. This just said find 2. So I added 360 and I subtracted. This one was negative, so what I did is I added 360 to get negative 30, but then instead of subtracting 360, I decided, oh, I'm going to add 360 again. So I added 360 once, there's one answer, added 360 again, and there's a second answer. So again, you can keep adding 360 to get as many coterminals as you need, or you can subtract to get as many coterminals as you need. But once around the circle is 360 degrees, so that's why you keep adding or subtracting 360. Now this didn't say in terms of radians, but realize once around the circle with radians is 2 pi. So if you're in terms of pi, you would be adding and subtracting 2 pi if it talks about coterminal. All right, and then F, convert between degrees and radians. So here's what I have you do, is I think you should just remember the proportion, the number of degrees is to 180 as the number of radians is to pi. Because remember, if you think about on the unit circle, here's 180 degrees, which is also pi. 360 degrees is 2 pi. 180 degrees is pi. So I know 180 degrees and pi mean the same thing. So you can just say the number of degrees is to 180 as the number of radians is to pi. So if I give you degrees, then you can just fill out that proportion and say 110 degrees is to 180 as the number of radians I don't know is to pi. And to solve that, you either can cross multiply, or you can just say, okay, to undo divided by pi, I'm going to multiply by pi. So I have 110 over 180 times pi. Well, to simplify, you know the zeros will cancel out. 10 goes into each. Nothing goes into 11 and 18. So I have 11 pi in the numerator divided by 18. So 11 pi over 18 radians. So if you always just set up your proportion, then to solve for r, you would multiply by pi. Now if we give you radians and it's in terms of pi, you can do the same thing. You could say d is to 180 as 3 pi over 8 is to pi. And then again, you could solve by multiplying by 180, or you could cross multiply. 180 times r equals d times pi. But the easier way to do these is to say, I know pi is 180 degrees. So if I give you radians in terms of pi, all you need to do is take 3 times 180 and divide it by 8. So I didn't use a calculator. I said, all right, I know that 4 goes into there twice. 4 goes into 180 45 times. So then I took 3 times 45 to get 135. Divided by 2, I got 67.5 degrees. So if we give you radians, and there's a pi in there, all you need to do, you don't need to use a formula. You can take 3 times 180, so just substitute 180 degrees in for pi, and then simplify the fraction or multiply across and do your division to get your final answer. So that is everything from 9.2.